Revenant Act 2 is coming to a close, and it's time for one final build. I put up a community poll a few days ago asking what class you would all like to see me make a build on next, and Warlock won by a landslide. So that's what we're going to be doing today. The Matadoxia Warlock chess piece is a very underrated exotic that provides a lot of versatility and dynamic gameplay. You'll find yourself suspending everything on the battlefield and generating melee energy at an extremely fast rate. A cool fact about this build is it allows you to stun all 3 champion types: Barrier, Overload, and Unstoppable. So it's great for Grandmaster Nightfalls and Master content. We'll be using Broodweaver for this build for reference. Now let's jump straight into the build. Starting off, there are a few different weapons I recommend pairing up with this build to increase its effects. Firstly, we have the exotic Kvastov, which in my opinion is the strongest primary weapon in the game currently. This is going to allow you to melt all of the suspended enemies and generate a bunch of orbs of power, as well as utilize the shoot to loot perk on the weapon for healing, ability regen, and ammo bricks from range. You're welcome to also use Wishkeeper if you'd like to get more suspend kills. I just personally prefer Kvastov for its versatile crowd control and utility. For your energy slot, I recommend using the Velocity Baton Grenade Launcher with Demolitionist and Attrition Orbs. This will allow you to generate a ton of orbs of power, as well as weaken enemies and stun overload champions, which I will discuss later on. On the other hand, you could also run a weapon using the Pugilist perk instead if you'd like to get another way of generating even more melee energy, but this isn't required, and the loadout that I am using I highly recommend. Now finally, for your heavy slot, it is very dependent on the activity you're running, but in this case, I use this build in solo Master Lost Sectors and Grandmaster Nightfalls, so I'd recommend a machine gun such as Commemoration or the Strand machine gun Marcado 45. Make sure you're using the Synergy mod on your energy and heavy weapons so that you can generate elemental pickups as well. Now let's move on to the subclass. For the super, your only choice here is Needlestorm, which is great for taking down crowds of enemies and pumping out high instantaneous damage. For your class ability, use the Healing Rift for survivability purposes. With one of the fragments I'm about to mention, you'll be able to use your Rift very frequently. For your grenade, use the Shackle Grenade. This grenade suspends targets and also works very well with one of the aspects I'm about to mention. Now let's start off with the aspects. The first aspect is Mind Spun Invocation, which works very well with your Shackle Grenades. Specifically on this aspect, it reads, hold to consume your Shackle Grenade and activate Weaver's Trance. Final blows while Weaver's Trance is active create a suspending detonation. This is going to shoot a huge suspending burst around the enemy that you killed and allow you to suspend even more enemies, allowing you to generate a ton of melee energy from Matadoxia. The second aspect is called the Wanderer. Tangles you throw attach to targets and detonate into a suspending burst. Destroying a tangle creates a suspending burst after a short delay. Now, tangles are generated quite frequently, and we are going all in on suspend in this build, so this works very well. Next, let's start off with the fragments. Firstly, we have Thread of Warding. Picking up an Orb of Power grants Woven Mail. This is a great survivability tool because it gives you Woven Mail, which is 45% damage resistance for 5 seconds. The next fragment is Thread of Generation. Dealing damage generates grenade energy. Now, this is going to allow you to chain your Weaver's Call quite frequently, as anytime you deal damage, as it says, you're going to be generating a ton of grenade energy. Now, with your Velocity Baton, it dealing passive damage means you're going to be getting your grenade even faster. Next is Thread of Mind. Defeating suspended targets grants class ability energy. Now, specifically, it ranges between 10% and 30% per suspended target kill. Now, when talking about the Healing Rift, this was the fragment that I mentioned earlier, as it's going to allow you to use your Healing Rift very frequently on the battlefield, as you're going to be killing suspended targets almost all the time. The final fragment in this build is Threat of Fury. Damaging targets with a Tangle grants melee energy. Now, it's going to grant you different ranges of melee energy depending on the type of enemy. This ranges between 10% to 30%, down from tier 1 minor enemies to tier 4 minor enemies, tier 3 elites, and higher. Now, this may seem familiar to you as it is very commonly used on Strand Titan builds. Next, let's talk about the artifact perks in this build. The first perk is Overload Breech-Loaded Grenade Launcher. This allows you to disrupt combatants using your grenade launcher to delay their ability energy regeneration and lower their damage output. This also allows you to instantly stun overload champions upon damaging them with your grenade launcher. The next perk is Authorize Mods Melee, which reduce the armor energy costs of all armor mods affecting your melee. Next is Rapid Impacts. Dealing damage with a grenade launcher temporarily increases the reload speed of grenade launchers. Now, this is great with Velocity Baton, as the reload at base is not always the greatest, so I would recommend running this just to make it a little quicker. Now, Now, I just wanted to mention the next perk you're not going to use very often, and it's going to happen actually very rarely, but when it does happen, it's very satisfying and can keep you alive. Power from Pain. Rapid final blows against weakened combatants grant you Devour. Now, this is more likely to happen in tougher activities with more yellow bar enemies and higher tier enemies. The next perk is the Thick of It. Rapid final blows while surrounded grant you Armor Charge. This is one of the most crucial artifact perks and very underrated in my opinion, as armor charges are essentially the core of build crafting for the most part. The next perk is Concussive Reload. Using a grenade launcher to damage a boss, damage a champion, or break a combatant shield weakens them. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to be able to proc Power from Pain a lot more frequently using this, as you'll be weakening multiple combatants. But again, this is way more likely to happen in something like a Grandmaster Nightfall, where there's multiple champions or yellow bars altogether. Next is Curative Orbs. The first time you break a target shield or break the shield of a guardian using their super, you will create an Orb of Power. Now, this works very well with, again, the Velocity Baton, as the Attrition Orbs perk combined with Curative Orbs spawns a ridiculous amount of Orbs of Power. Also, using your Kvastov with Shoot to Loot, you'll be able to shoot the orbs to get health, abilities, etc. Moving on to the last column, we have Supernova. Picking up a Void Breach causes your next source of void damage to create a large weakening pulse. Now, this pairs very, very well with the Velocity Baton, as with the Synergy mod on your Velocity Baton, you'll be generating tons of Void Breaches. For the final perk, Serve Cold. Picking up a Stasis Shard grants you class ability energy, and picking up a Void Breach grants you melee energy. Now, since we will be generating a lot of Void Breaches, this is yet another way to give you that extra little bit of boost on your melee energy regen. Now that we've talked about the artifact perks, I'm going to be talking about the tonic that I highly recommend running with this build. That tonic is the Refined Tonic of Brawling. Reduces incoming damage from combatants that are at point blank range. It also boosts 2 artifact perks. Firstly, the Thick of It. While you are surrounded, your weapons have increased handling and swords have increased charge rate. Also, Curative Orbs. Picking up an Orb of Power or Elemental Pickup grants you a small amount of health. Now, I like this second perk specifically because it allows you to take off recuperation on your legs and run better already, which we will discuss momentarily. Now, let's go over the armor mods. Firstly, we have Heavy Ammo Finder, Heavy Ammo Scout, and Kinetic Siphon. You're welcome to change the Heavy Ammo Scout to hands-on if you are doing solo content, as the Scout really isn't needed. Also, the Kinetic Siphon is super strong with your Kvastov, as your Kvastov's going to be ricochet rounding tons of enemies constantly, allowing you to get a lot of multi-kills, thus generating orbs. Next on our gauntlets, we have Heavy-Handed, Melee Kickstart, and Impact Induction. Now, the first two are self-explanatory, but I do like running Impact Induction, as you'll be using your melee a lot, and you also need to be chaining your grenade energy to also chain your melee energy. So running this mod allows your grenade and melee to work hand in hand. On your chest piece, I recommend running damage resistance mods that pertain to the threat of the activity as per usual. Now, on your legs, I recommend running Better Already, Invigoration, and a Kinetic Weapon Surge. Now, with the tonic, as I mentioned earlier, the tonic gives you recuperation, meaning you don't actually need to run recuperation on your boots, and you can run Better Already to get both effects. Now, I like running a Kinetic Surge here, as it boosts your Kvastov's damage by 10% when you have an armor charge. Finally, on your bond, I recommend running Outreach, Powerful Attraction, and Reaper. Now, all of these mods obviously pertain to your class ability, so using the Thread of Mind Fragment, you'll be able to generate your Rift very frequently and thus proc these very frequently. Now that I've discussed the armor mods, let's talk about a few stats that I recommend prioritizing. Now, firstly, I recommend going for 100 Resilience. As I say every video, always go 100 Resilience on every single PvE build, no excuses, no matter what. This gives you 30% base extra damage resistance. The next stat is Strength, as the build is heavily reliant on your melees, so I would make sure this is tier 10. The next two stats are honestly your choice, but I recommend going for Recovery over Discipline. I would say go for tier 8 for Recovery and tier 6 for Discipline. However, you could swap those if you wanted to. Well, now that we've talked about the meat and bones of the build, let's talk about the gameplay loop. Learning the gameplay loop is important as it allows you to use the build at its highest potential and understand the intricacies of it. Now, with this exotic chest piece, your melees will be able to stun unstoppable champions with a triple melee combo, and also it'll be able to stun barrier champions with just one melee use. Firstly, I recommend consuming your grenade to proc Weaver's Cult as much as absolutely possible. This will allow you to suspend tons of enemies, kill them to get a lot of melee energy. Also, for passive damage for Threat of Generation for your grenade, I would recommend using your Velocity Baton very, very frequently to get that, again, passive damage and orb generation. Now, Kvastov is the main weapon with this build, so I recommend using that the most. Make sure you're utilizing its Shoot to Loot perk to collect orbs of power and ammo bricks for ability regen, ammo, and health. Also, if there's a group of suspended targets, I would immediately swap to your Kvastov and start beaming them, as the Eyes Up Guardian exotic perk will just absolutely shred them. Anyways, Guardians, that is all for today's video. I just wanted to thank you all again for 10,000 subscribers on YouTube. That is absolutely wild. We have a long road ahead of us, and I appreciate it so much. With your support, the content will continue to improve and the builds will continue to roll out for you. Thanks so much for watching today's video. If you enjoyed, consider hitting the subscribe button if you haven't already, with the post notification bell so you don't miss any future uploads. Also, consider dropping a like on the video, as it's free and it literally just takes a second. Also, feel free to comment feedback on the build, videos, or anything else you'd like to comment. Now, if you do end up disliking the video, just make sure you tell me in the comments why, because I am always open to feedback and improvement. Anyways, Guardians, that's just about it for our final Revenant Act 2 build. Happy New Year's to you all, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Peace.